Imagine a floating city built of 4 billion pounds of American steel. It is powered by two nuclear reactors that burn hotter than the surface of the sun. It carries a population of 5,000 people, a police force, a hospital, and enough food to feed a small nation. But none of that matters. The reactors, the steel, the people, they exist for only one reason. They are there to serve the 85 lethal machines parked on the roof and hidden in the basement. We are talking about the United States Navy's Carrier Air Wing, a collection of F-35C Lightning IIs, F-18 Super Hornets, and E-2D Hawkeyes that, when combined, represent a financial investment of over $10 billion. That is more than the entire gross domestic product of many countries, packed onto a ship that is constantly moving, constantly vibrating, and constantly hunting. The question that keeps admirals awake at night is not how to launch these jets. We solved that problem 70 years ago. The question is, how do you store $10 billion worth of high-tech aluminum and stealth coating in the middle of a saltwater ocean that wants to eat it alive? How do you move a 30-ton fighter jet from the basement to the roof in seconds while the ship is pitching 20 feet in a violent storm? And how do you do it without blowing up the ship? Today, we are going to tear the flight deck off a Nimitz-class carrier and look inside the machine. We are going to descend into the Hangar Bay, the most expensive garage on Earth. We will analyze the physics of the massive elevators that defy gravity, the nightmare of moving high explosives through a crowded room, and the technological revolution of the USS Gerald R. Ford that is changing the laws of naval warfare. You think you know how an aircraft carrier works because you've seen Top Gun. You haven't seen anything yet. Let's start with the assets. To understand the stakes, you have to understand the price tag. The aircraft sitting on these decks are not just planes, they are flying computers wrapped in stealth technology. The F-35C Lightning II is the crown jewel. A single unit costs roughly $100 million. The helmet alone, custom-fitted to the pilot's skull with augmented reality projectors, costs $400,000. That is the price of a Ferrari worn on a human head. Then you have the F-18 Super Hornet, the workhorse, clocking in at $70 million. The E-2D Hawkeye, the flying radar dish, costs over $170 million. When a carrier leaves port, it is carrying a combat loadout that is arguably the most valuable concentration of military hardware anywhere on the planet, and the Navy parks it in the most hostile environment imaginable. Saltwater is the enemy of stealth coating. It corrodes aluminum. It destroys avionics. If you left $1 billion of cash on your driveway during a hurricane, you would be called insane. The Navy does it every single day. So how do they protect this investment? They hide it. While the flight deck gets all the glory in the movies, the real logistical miracle happens 2 decks below in a cavernous steel cathedral known as the Hangar Bay. This is not just a parking lot. It is the heart of the ship's maintenance capabilities. On a Nimitz-class carrier, the Hangar Bay is 685 feet long, 110 feet wide, and 25 feet tall. To visualize this, imagine tearing the roof off a major sports arena and stuffing it inside a warship. It spans 2/3 of the ship's length. It is massive, echoing, and smells permanently of hydraulic fluid, jet fuel, and sweat. But it is not just one big room. It is a fortress designed to survive the apocalypse. The hangar is divided into 3 or 4 separate bays by massive, heavy-duty steel doors that weigh tons. These are conflagration stations. Why do we need 25-foot-tall steel doors inside a ship? Because of history written in blood. In 1967, a rocket accidentally fired on the deck of the USS Forrestal. The resulting fire detonated 1,000-pound bombs, melted jets, and killed 134 sailors. The Navy learned a brutal lesson that day. Fire on a carrier is the ultimate predator. The Hangar Bay is designed to chop the ship into airtight, fireproof sections in seconds. If a fuel tank ruptures in Bay 1 and ignites, the conflagration doors slam shut. The fire suppression systems, which don't just sprinkle water but flood the bay with AFFF aqueous film-forming foam, turn the room into a chemical blizzard to suffocate the flames. Meanwhile, the jets in Bay 2 and Bay 3 are safe. It is a system built on paranoia and engineering perfection. But the hangar bay is more than a bunker. It is a hospital for machines. When an F-18 lands on the deck above, it hits the wires with force that would snap a commercial airliner in half. The landing gear screams, the airframe twists. After a few months of this abuse, the jets break. You cannot call a tow truck. You cannot send it back to the factory. You have to fix it right there, thousands of miles from land. At the aft end of the hangar, you find the AMD, the Aircraft Intermediate Maintenance Division. These are the unsung mechanics who perform miracles. They have engine test cells where they can run a jet engine at full afterburner inside the ship. They have calibration labs to fix the delicate radars. They have shops to repair the radar-absorbing skin of the F-35, which requires a cleanroom environment in the middle of a dirty industrial ship. Now let's talk about the logistics of movement. The flight deck is small. It is only 4.5 acres. You cannot keep all 80 aircraft up there at once. It would be a traffic jam that prevents takeoffs. So the Navy plays a high-stakes game of Tetris. They constantly cycle aircraft between the roof and the basement. This brings us to the most critical moving parts on the entire ship, the aircraft elevators. On a Nimitz-class carrier, there are 4 of them. 3 on the starboard side, 1 on the port side. These are not the elevators you take to your office. These are irregularly shaped platforms of aluminum and steel, big enough to hold 2 F-18s or 1 massive helicopter. They ride on the outside of the hull, suspended over the ocean. The physics of these elevators is terrifying. They are powered by massive hydraulic engines and steel cables. They can lift 130,000 pounds, that is the weight of a main battle tank, from the hangar to the flight deck in seconds. But they are violent, they smell of grease. The cables stretch and groan under the load, and they are open to the elements. Imagine riding a platform with no guardrails, 60 feet above the rushing water, while holding onto a $70 million jet that is sliding on wheels while the ship is rolling 10 degrees to the left. One broken chain, one failed brake, and the jet rolls backward into the sea. It has happened. It is a nightmare that every handler trains to avoid. The blue shirts, the aircraft handlers, move these 30-ton beasts by hand and with small tractors called Tilly bars. They work within inches of the edge. It is a ballet of brute force and physics. But the Nimitz class is old technology. It uses cables, pulleys, and hydraulics, technology that dates back to the 1950s. It is heavy, maintenance-intensive, and prone to breaking down. If an elevator jams during combat, you cannot get your jets to the fight. You are defenseless. This is why the United States Navy spent billions developing the future, the Ford-class carrier. The USS Gerald R. Ford is not just an upgrade, it is a revolution. And the biggest change is how it moves metal. The engineers looked at the hydraulic elevators and said, delete them. On the Ford, the elevators don't use cables, they use magnets. It is called the Advanced Weapons Elevator and the Aircraft Elevator System, utilizing linear synchronous motors. Think of a Maglev train in Japan, the ones that float on magnetic fields. Now turn that train vertical. That is the Ford elevator. High-powered electromagnets pull the platform up the side of the ship. There are no cables to snap. There is no hydraulic fluid to leak. It is silent, it is smooth, and it is terrifyingly fast. The old elevators could lift 10,500 pounds at 100 feet per minute. The new Ford elevators can lift 24,000 pounds at 150 feet per minute. That is a 50% increase in speed and more than double the weight capacity. Why does this matter? Because in a war with a peer adversary like China or Russia, speed is life. The metric that matters is sortie generation rate. How many jets can you launch in 24 hours? The Nimitz can launch about 120 sorties a day. The Ford is designed to hit 160 with a surge capacity of 270. That is a 30% increase in violence. That extra speed comes from the elevators. The Ford can move jets and, more importantly, bombs, faster than any ship in history. Let's go deeper, below the hangar bay. Below the waterline, deep in the armored gut of the ship, sits the bomb farm. These are the magazines. This is where millions of pounds of high explosives, laser-guided kits, and missiles are stored. On the old Nimitz carriers, moving a bomb from the deep magazine to the flight deck was a nightmare. It had to go through multiple elevators, be transferred by hand, moved through the mess decks where people are eating, and finally up to the roof. It was slow and dangerous. The Ford changed the geometry of war. The new weapons elevators go straight from the magazine to the flight deck. They are automated. You push a button, and a pallet of JDAMs shoots up through the ship like a bullet in a chamber. This design cuts the time to arm a jet by 75%. In the time it took a Nimitz crew to arm one squadron, a Ford crew can arm the entire air wing. But the storage of the jets isn't just about elevators and doors. It is about the why. Why do we store them below? Why not build a bigger flight deck? The answer is protection. Modern warfare is filled with threats that didn't exist in World War II: hypersonic missiles, drones, satellite surveillance. A jet sitting on the flight deck is exposed. It is vulnerable to salt spray, which eats the radar-absorbent materials on the F-35. It is vulnerable to green water, waves crashing over the bow in a storm, and it is vulnerable to shrapnel. If a missile hits the flight deck, anything parked there is destroyed. The hangar bay is an armored shelter. The hull of a carrier is made of classified steel alloys designed to withstand torpedo impacts and cruise missiles. By keeping the jets deep inside the ship, the Navy ensures that even if the ship takes a hit, the air wing survives to fight back. This brings us to the human element. The hangar deck is a culture of its own. It is the social hub of the ship's working class. This is where the crew gathers for all-hands calls. This is where they set up basketball hoops during downtime. It is where the gym equipment is stashed in the corners between multi-million-dollar engines. But when flight quarters is called, the basketball hoops vanish and the room transforms into a factory of war. The green shirts, the maintenance crews, swarm the aircraft. They are swapping engines, fixing hydraulics, and reloading software. They work 18-hour shifts. They sleep in racks stacked 3 high. They eat powdered eggs. And they do it all so that the pilot can strap into a perfectly functioning machine. There is a specific danger in the hangar that haunts every handler: the crunch. The clearances in the hangar bay are measured in inches. You are parking an F-18 with a 44-foot wingspan next to an E-2 Hawkeye with an 80-foot wingspan behind a support pillar near a fuel station. As the ship rolls in the ocean, the handlers have to push these jets into their spots without scratching the paint. If you bump a jet into a bulkhead, that is a crunch. It costs millions of dollars to fix. It can ground the jet for the entire deployment. It ruins careers. The hangar deck officer conducts this symphony like a maestro, using a Ouija board, a table with cutouts of every plane to plan the moves. One wrong move on the table and you have gridlock on the deck. The future of this storage and logistics system is about to get even more complex. The Navy is introducing drones. The MQ-25 Stingray is an unmanned tanker that will fly from carriers. It is the size of a fighter jet. It needs storage, it needs maintenance, and it has no pilot to hit the brakes. The handlers will have to move these robots around the deck using remote controls, adding another layer of complexity to the dance. The Ford class was built with this in mind. Its hangar bays are reconfigurable. Its electrical systems are massive, capable of generating 3 times the power of a Nimitz. specifically to charge the batteries and systems of future laser weapons and electric drones. But let's talk about the ultimate fail-safe. What happens if the elevators break? What happens if the hangar doors jam? The carrier is designed with redundancy upon redundancy. If the electrical motors fail, there are manual backups. If the hydraulics burst, there are emergency ratchets. The crew trains for mass casualty scenarios where they have to manhandle equipment without power. This is why the physical fitness of the crew is not a luxury. It is an engineering requirement. You might need to push a 40,000-pound jet out of the way of a fire by hand. The scale of the floating fortress is hard to comprehend until you look at the consumables. A carrier air wing burns hundreds of thousands of gallons of JP-5 jet fuel every day of flight operations. That fuel has to be stored in tanks surrounding the hull, which also act as armor against torpedoes, pumped up to the hangar and flight deck and filtered to purity. If the fuel is contaminated, the jet engines flame out. The purple shirts, the fuel handlers, are constantly testing samples, smelling the fuel, checking for water. It is a logistics chain that starts at a refinery in Texas, goes to a tanker in the Pacific, transfers to the carrier via a hose at sea, and ends up in the tank of an F-35 launching to defend the fleet. And we must return to the F-35C, the ghost in the machine. Storing this specific jet has forced the Navy to change how it builds ships. The F-35 is loud, it is hot, its exhaust can scorch the deck plates, its stealth coating is toxic if burned. The hangar bays had to be upgraded with new power classifications, lithium-ion battery storage, and new security protocols. You cannot just walk up to an F-35 and look inside. It is a classified vault. The hangar bay is now a mix of high-security zones within a high-security ship. When you look at a carrier like the USS Gerald R. you are looking at a system of systems. The electromagnetic catapults EMALS on the roof launch the planes. The advanced arresting gear AAG catches them. The plasma arc waste destruction system burns the trash. But the skeleton that holds it all together is the storage and movement logic. If you cannot move the jets, you cannot fight. If you cannot fix the jets, you cannot fight. The hangar bay is the stomach of the beast. It digests the broken, the empty, and the tired, and sends them back up to the roof renewed, refueled, and rearmed. The efficiency of this system is what makes the U.S. Navy the only true blue water superpower. China is building carriers. The UK has carriers. But absolutely no one has mastered the pit stop logistics like the Americans. The ability to land, refuel, rearm, and launch a jet in minutes continuously for days on end is a capability that took 100 years of aviation mistakes, accidents, and engineering to perfect. It was bought with the lives of sailors who died in hangar deck fires and elevator accidents. So the next time you see a fighter jet scream off the deck of a carrier, don't just look at the flame. Think about where it came from. Think about the elevator that lifted it from the dark belly of the ship. Think about the mechanic who spent 12 hours in the hangar bay replacing a hydraulic seal with grease-covered hands. Think about the billions of dollars of hardware stacked like sardines in a floating garage, riding out a typhoon in the Pacific. It is a miracle of logistics. It is a masterpiece of engineering, and it is the most terrifyingly efficient weapons system in human history. This level of dominance is not an accident. It is a choice. A choice to build the biggest, the fastest, and the most expensive ships the world has ever seen. And as long as those elevators are running and those hangar bays are full, the horizon belongs to the United States Navy. If this deep dive into the mechanical guts of the American supercarrier blew your mind, you need to do 3 things right now. First, smash that like button to support real, in-depth military analysis. Second, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. We are currently filming a documentary about the secret nuclear bunkers of the Cold War that you do not want to miss. And finally, I have a question for you. We talked about the elevators, the explosives, and the sheer cost of these machines. If you were a naval architect designing the next carrier, would you keep the human pilots or would you trust that $13 billion ship entirely to AI drones? Tell me in the comments below, keep the pilots or go full drone. I read every single comment and I want to know what you think. If you think the Hangar Bay is impressive, wait until you see what happens when a submarine has to launch a nuclear missile from underwater. Click the video on your screen right now to enter the world of ballistic missile submarines. The engineering there makes an aircraft carrier look simple. Click it, and I'll see you there.